I spent the entire week preparing for Christmas, baking, decorating, making sure the house smelled like cinnamon and pine. I had visions of laughter around the table, my son telling stories, my daughter-in-law smiling at the traditions I'd kept alive for years. I had carefully chosen every dish, every ornament, every little detail, because Christmas wasn't just a holiday. It was a chance for family to be together, to feel love. I never expected betrayal, not on the day I opened my door with a warm smile, not when I set the table with care, not when I imagined their delight at the spread I had prepared. But sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. I'm a mother. I've given everything for my family, quietly sacrificed, cooked countless meals, stayed up late worrying over their happiness. And yet, this Christmas, I learned that love and effort aren't always returned the way you hope. They said they'd come, that we'd celebrate together. They promised me laughter and togetherness. But the moment I walked into the living room, the moment I thought family would gather around me, I realized they had other plans. By the end of this story, you'll see why some traditions aren't just about food. They're about respect, dignity, and knowing exactly how to serve it when it's denied to you. I had been looking forward to this Christmas for weeks. The moment the calendar flipped to December, I started planning. Not just the gifts, not just the food, but everything. Christmas for me has always been more than a day. It's a feeling, a memory, a tradition that I've carefully nurtured for my family for decades. And this year, I wanted it to be perfect. I began my preparations early in the week. I went to the market and picked out the freshest ingredients: plump golden brown turkeys, sweet potatoes so sweet they almost melted on the tongue, cranberries that glistened like little rubies, and the freshest greens for the salad. I carefully inspected every ingredient because I wanted nothing but the best on this table. It wasn't just about cooking. It was about giving them a meal that felt like a hug, that reminded them that they were loved. While shopping, I imagined my son's smile, the way his eyes would light up when he saw the table set with care. I pictured my daughter-in-law laughing as I placed the ornaments on the tree just so. I thought about the stories we'd tell, the warm feeling of family gathered together, and I could hardly contain my excitement. I even planned little touches, handwritten place cards, a sprig of holly on each napkin, a centerpiece that would smell like pine and cinnamon. Every detail mattered. Back at home, I unpacked my purchases and started the real work. The kitchen became my sanctuary. I put on my favorite Christmas playlist, the one with soft bells, classic carols, and the kind of songs that make you close your eyes and remember childhood. I chopped vegetables, mixed spices, and tasted sauces, humming along to the music, imagining the conversations that would happen around the table. I was creating more than a meal. I was creating memories, a night that would linger in their minds long after the dishes were cleared. Then came decorating. I pulled out boxes of ornaments that had been carefully stored for years, some delicate, some quirky, all meaningful. Every ornament had a story, every light strand a memory. I wrapped the tree in sparkling lights, placed shiny baubles in clusters, and set up garlands around the room. I even lit the scented candles that smelled like baked cookies and pine, letting the scent fill the house as if to whisper, "This is home, this is family, this is love." I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement every time I thought about my son and daughter-in-law arriving. I imagined them stepping into this warm, fragrant home, seeing the table set to perfection, feeling the care and love I had poured into every detail. I thought about how proud I'd feel seeing them enjoy the meal, the laughter, the joy of a family together. My heart swelled at the idea of being part of their happiness, of making this Christmas one they would never forget. As I worked, I reflected on the years I'd spent preparing for these moments. I thought of the nights I stayed up wrapping gifts while the house slept, the mornings I woke early to bake, the countless times I cleaned and polished until everything shone. I realized that every sacrifice, every ounce of effort, every tired hand was worth it if it meant seeing my family happy. And this Christmas, I promised myself, would be no different. I placed the turkey carefully in the oven, watching it roast to golden perfection. I arranged the salad with a precision that only love can inspire, sprinkled cranberries over the table like little drops of joy, and made sure every detail was flawless. I stepped back and looked at my work. The table set, the room glowing softly, the tree twinkling, the house warm and inviting. It felt like magic. It felt like home. And yet, beneath all my excitement, there was a small, unspoken hope. I hoped they would notice. I hoped my son would glance at the table and see the love in every dish. I hoped my daughter-in-law would smile at the decorations and feel the care in every touch. I hoped that this Christmas they would understand, even in a small way, how much it meant to me to bring them together, to show them that family is worth the effort, worth the love, worth the sacrifice. I went over everything one more time. Did I forget a napkin? Are the candles lit just right? Did the tree sparkle enough? Everything was perfect. And in my heart, I was ready. I could hardly wait for the doorbell to ring, for the sound of footsteps, for the warmth of family filling my home. Little did I know that the excitement, the love, and the effort I had poured into this Christmas would be met with something I never expected, a silence, a betrayal that would change the night forever. But for now, I told myself, this is Christmas. I am prepared. I am ready. I am excited. And nothing can take away the love I've put into this day. Not yet. The morning of Christmas, I woke early, heart fluttering with excitement. I could hear the soft whistle of the wind outside, but inside, the house smelled like cinnamon, pine, and roasting turkey. Every decoration glimmered in the morning light. Every candle flickered like a tiny promise of warmth. I had poured my heart into this day, and I told myself over and over, today is for family, for love, for laughter. I checked my watch for the 100th time, imagining their arrival, picturing my son stepping through the doorway with that familiar grin, my daughter-in-law carrying gifts, or maybe a bottle of wine, both of them laughing at one of my silly holiday jokes. I straightened the table one more time, adjusted the napkins, and rearranged the centerpiece slightly, just to make it perfect. Every little detail mattered. Every little detail spoke of the care I had put into this Christmas. I sat by the window, pretending to sip my coffee, but really, I was watching the driveway, listening for the sound of tires on the gravel. With each passing minute, my anticipation grew. I could feel the excitement in my chest, a steady rhythm of hope that this would be the Christmas I had imagined, the one where my family would see, feel, and appreciate the love I had poured into every moment. Then the first subtle signs appeared. A text from my son, short and clipped, "Will be there soon." Soon? That word carried a weight of vagueness, a flicker of uncertainty, and I remembered the past months, the little delays, the forgotten calls, the times I had been brushed aside. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just the chaos of the season. Maybe I was imagining it. I kept myself busy, moving from room to room, straightening the ornaments, checking the candles, making sure everything smelled and looked perfect. But the excitement I had felt minutes ago began to mingle with something else, an unease, a small, nagging doubt. Why hadn't they mentioned the time clearly? Why were their texts so short, so indifferent? As the hours passed, the signs became clearer. I noticed my son calling only once, quickly, just to say they were running late. My daughter-in-law sent a message about bringing something for the table, but it was not a thoughtful message, just a short, hurried note. The warmth I had expected, the joy, the eagerness, they seemed absent. And yet, I held on to hope. I told myself, maybe they're just busy. Maybe it's just a stressful day. I went to the kitchen to check the turkey, to make sure it was perfect, to remind myself that I had done everything I could to make this Christmas special. I glanced out the window again, every shadow of a passing car making my heart leap. I heard footsteps on the porch and rushed to the door, but it was only a neighbor carrying a small package. My heart sank, and yet I forced a smile. They're coming. They'll be here any minute. When the car finally pulled up, I felt a mixture of relief and excitement. I opened the door expecting hugs, smiles, the warmth of family, but instead I was met with something else, a fleeting glance, a quick Merry Christmas, a tone that felt almost rehearsed. My son barely looked at me, and my daughter-in-law seemed more interested in checking her phone than greeting me. There was no embrace, no sparkle in their eyes, no excitement that matched my own. As they stepped inside, I noticed the subtle signs that would later reveal the truth. The way my son avoided eye contact, distracted by some imagined worry. The way my daughter-in-law lingered near the coats and shoes, keeping a distance from me, her smile polite but forced. Even as they took their seats at the table, there was a stiffness, a coldness, a lack of the warmth I had imagined. And yet, I held my composure. I smiled, I welcomed them, I poured the wine, I served the snacks, all while a tiny voice in my mind whispered, "Something is off." The tension in the room grew with every passing minute. The laughter I had anticipated never arrived. The small talk was stilted, polite but hollow. I tried to engage them in conversation, asking about their trip, their day, their plans. Their responses were curt, minimal, lacking the care and enthusiasm that should have filled this house. My heart ached, but I kept a steady face. I reminded myself, this is my home, my effort, my Christmas. I would not let their attitude ruin it, for now. And then came the little hints of indifference that pierced me more deeply than anything else. My son didn't glance at the table, didn't comment on the food or the decorations. My daughter-in-law didn't notice the centerpiece, the ornaments, or the candles. It was as if all my love and effort, all the hours I had poured into this day, had vanished into thin air, unnoticed, unappreciated. The excitement I had felt in the morning had begun to twist into anxiety, into a creeping realization that perhaps this day would not be what I had hoped. I walked quietly to the kitchen, pretending to check on something, but really I was observing. Every movement they made, every glance, every tone of voice, it all carried a subtle disrespect I could not ignore. And still, I waited, hoping, praying that this was temporary, that the warmth and joy I had imagined would appear any moment now. Little did I know that the signs I had noticed, the indifference, the distance, the subtle disregard, were only the beginning. The real betrayal, the one that would leave me stunned, hurt, and determined, was still waiting for me just beyond the next few hours. But in this moment, all I could do was wait, with my heart full of hope and my eyes scanning the room for the spark of family I had imagined for so long. I had been waiting, hoping, imagining that the moment my son and his wife stepped through the door, the house would fill with warmth, the sound of laughter, the smell of holiday dishes mingling with the scent of pine, and the joy of family finally gathered together. But then the moment came when the air shifted, when my heart sank, when I realized that this Christmas, the family I had dreamed of wasn't going to appear at the table with me at all. It started as a subtle feeling, almost like a flicker of unease that I tried to dismiss. I poured the wine into the glasses, arranged the napkins once more, and set the silverware with care, all the while keeping my eyes on the door, watching for the familiar footsteps. I expected to hear them call out, "Merry Christmas, Mom," or to see my son's grin lighting up the room, but what I saw instead was nothing. I looked around the living room, hoping maybe I had imagined it. The casual, almost deliberate way they drifted past the kitchen without a glance at the table. My son sank into the sofa, phone in hand, barely nodding at me. My daughter-in-law murmured a polite "Merry Christmas" and moved toward the snacks as if the table I had so carefully prepared was invisible. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought my heart might break right there in the middle of my own home. I tried to tell myself it was a misunderstanding. Perhaps they were distracted, tired, or preoccupied. Maybe they simply didn't see all the effort I had put into the meal. But as I watched them pick at the appetizers, chat quietly among themselves, and completely ignore the centerpiece, the candles, the turkey, my effort, my love, I realized with a sinking feeling that this was no accident. They were choosing intentionally to leave me out. I remember standing there, holding the serving spoon, my hands trembling, not from cold but from shock. My mind raced. Are they serious? Could they really be so thoughtless? Could they really do this to me after everything? Every memory of past sacrifices, every Christmas I had spent staying up late, every holiday I had meticulously planned flashed before my eyes. I had done all this for them, and yet here I was, invisible. The confusion was overwhelming. Part of me wanted to speak up immediately, to demand an explanation, to confront the hurt I felt as loudly as possible. But another part of me froze, paralyzed by disbelief. How could they, my own son and daughter-in-law, abandon me on a day meant for family? I had never felt such a deep, sinking mix of shock and heartbreak. The room, so full of light, suddenly felt cold, almost empty, despite the glowing candles and twinkling tree. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My mind was a whirlwind. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they're overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew it was something else. This wasn't about oversight. This was about choice. They had chosen to ignore me, to sideline me, to turn their attention elsewhere, while I, who had prepared everything, who had poured love into this day, was left standing, watching. I moved slowly to my chair at the table, each step heavy with disappointment. I tried to sit gracefully, to hold myself together, but inside I felt the weight of hurt pressing down on my chest. The tears threatened to fall, but I swallowed them back, forcing myself to breathe, to focus, to not let my emotions spill over in front of them. I will not give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken, I thought. Not today. Even as I watched them laughing quietly at their own conversation, completely detached from the meal I had prepared, I felt a wave of clarity. This moment, painful as it was also a turning point. I realized that my hurt was valid, my expectations reasonable, and my dignity non-negotiable. I had given love, effort, and care, and while they chose to disregard it, I would not disregard myself. My thoughts became a steady, quiet dialogue with myself. I deserve to be seen. I deserve to be heard. I deserve respect. They may ignore me, but I will not ignore myself. The anger began to simmer beneath the shock, the hurt transforming into resolve. I would not scream. I would not cry openly, but I would let them see that their indifference did not diminish my worth. I looked around the room once more, at the glowing lights on the tree, the table set perfectly, the turkey golden and steaming. It was a moment of bitter contrast, the warmth I had created, the love I had poured into every detail, juxtaposed with the cold indifference of the very people I had hoped would appreciate it. And in that contrast, I found the seed of my strength. I realized, painfully yet clearly, that the evening would not go as I had imagined. My son and daughter-in-law had abandoned me at the very moment I had expected family, and yet this abandonment, this betrayal, would not define me. I would not let it. I would wait, I would observe, and when the moment was right, I would make sure that the love, the effort, and the respect I deserved were not ignored any longer. And so, there I sat at my own table, watching them, feeling the hurt, confusion, and shock, but also quietly, silently preparing myself. Because even in that painful moment, one thought rang louder than all the sorrow. They may have abandoned me at this table, but I will not be abandoned in my dignity, my self-respect, or my voice. After the initial shock of seeing my son and daughter-in-law drift past my table without even a glance, I retreated to the kitchen, though I didn't need to check anything. Every dish was perfect, every ornament twinkled, every candle flickered softly, but none of it seemed to matter. The warmth I had built, the love I had poured into this home, felt invisible in the eyes of the very people I had hoped to cherish it most. I leaned against the counter, gripping it lightly, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I kept asking myself, why? Why would they abandon me on Christmas after everything I've done for them? The question echoed through the quiet of my home. I replayed every interaction of the past months, searching for signs, explanations, any reason that could justify the indifference I now faced. I found nothing, only the subtle patterns, the small dismissals, the coldness that I had sometimes brushed off as they're busy or it's just life. Loneliness washed over me like a wave, heavy and unrelenting. I realized I had built my anticipation around their presence, around the warmth of family, around the idea that my love and effort would be recognized, and yet here I was, alone at my table, my heart aching, my mind spinning. Was this my fault? Did I do something wrong? I asked myself. But deep down, I knew the answer. I had done nothing wrong. I had only given love, care, and attention. The betrayal lay not in my actions, but in their choice to disregard them. My inner monologue became louder, sharper. I questioned everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Is this what family does? Do they abandon those who love them most when it's inconvenient? Do they take for granted the sacrifices I've made, the countless hours I've spent making life easier and brighter for them? The words reverberated inside my head, mixing with the sadness, the confusion, the simmering hurt. Every corner of the house seemed to echo my thoughts back at me, as if the walls themselves were mourning alongside me. I sat down slowly at my chair, staring at the centerpiece I had arranged so meticulously. Each ornament, each candle, each sprig of holly seemed to mock me now. I had envisioned their eyes lighting up, their smiles reflecting my own joy. Instead, there had been avoidance, indifference, and a kind of polite coldness that cut deeper than any harsh words could have. The realization settled in. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of neglect. This was deliberate. They had chosen consciously to exclude me. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, though I didn't let them fall. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken, and yet the sting of disappointment lingered, heavy and persistent. I thought of all the times I had put them first, cooking late-night meals, attending every minor event, putting aside my own plans to ensure theirs went smoothly. I thought of the Christmas mornings when I stayed up until dawn, wrapping gifts, making sure every present carried a note, a ribbon, a little piece of my heart. And here I was, left to witness the absence of recognition, left to sit in the shadow of their disregard. I reflected on the subtle signs I had seen over time, the fleeting glances, the forgotten calls, the hurried texts. They had been building toward this moment, hadn't they? Every small neglect, every casual dismissal, every moment of thoughtless action had prepared me for this ultimate betrayal. And the truth hurt, worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just this Christmas. It was a pattern, a thread that wove through our family interactions, now fully visible in the harsh light of this abandoned meal. My mind wandered to questions I had no answers for. Have I misjudged them all these years? Have I assumed they cared when really they've always prioritized convenience over connection? Am I alone in valuing family, tradition, love? The thoughts were painful but necessary. I had to confront them, acknowledge them, and allow myself to feel the loneliness, the sting of disappointment, the deep ache of being ignored by those I had hoped would see me. As I sat quietly, I began to feel a strange clarity emerging from the hurt. The anger that had been simmering under the surface began to take shape, a protective force mingling with my sadness. I realized that while their actions could wound me, they could not define my worth. I was the same mother, the same woman who had given tirelessly, who had prepared this home with love, who had dreamed of family togetherness. My value did not depend on their recognition, but their choices had exposed the truth of how much they valued me. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the emotions wash over me. Hurt, shock, confusion, loneliness, disappointment, they were all there, and I allowed myself to feel each one fully. In that stillness, a quiet voice within me began to speak. I will not be invisible. I will not be disregarded. I will not allow their choices to diminish the love I have for myself or the dignity I deserve. By the time I opened my eyes, the house was quiet again, the soft flicker of candlelight illuminating the perfectly set table, the decorations, the feast I had prepared with so much care. And I understood, fully and clearly, that this moment, the betrayal, the abandonment, the loneliness, was not the end. It was the turning point, a painful, humbling, and yet empowering turning point that would shape what came next. I knew one thing with certainty. I would not let their betrayal pass unanswered. I would process it, understand it, and when the time was right, I would act, not out of spite, but out of a quiet, unshakable assertion of my worth and the respect I had always deserved. And as I sat alone at my Christmas table, the weight of disappointment pressing down on me, I made a silent promise to myself. They may have abandoned me, but I will not abandon myself. I will not let this betrayal define me. I sat there, at my perfectly set Christmas table, the quiet hum of the tree lights and the soft flicker of candles surrounding me, and I felt the shift, the hurt, the shock, the loneliness. They had been heavy, suffocating, and yet necessary, because in that pain I found clarity. I realized that sitting in silence, letting their disregard slide, would only let them continue to overlook me. This Christmas, this day I had imagined so carefully, would not be stolen from me, not entirely. I breathed deeply, letting the silence of the room fill me with focus. The anger I had buried under sadness began to transform, not wild, impulsive anger, but a quiet, deliberate resolve. I knew I had to act, not out of revenge for revenge's sake, but to reclaim the respect I had earned and to make them understand that love, effort, and care cannot be taken for granted. The first step was to think, not yell, to plan, not react. I began to visualize how I could assert myself without losing composure, how I could turn this moment of betrayal into a moment of dignity. They may have ignored me at the table, but they will not ignore me forever. I thought of my words, my tone, my presence, how to ensure that every glance, every carefully chosen phrase communicated that I was not to be disregarded. I walked slowly to the window and watched the snowfall outside. Each flake drifting softly to the ground reminded me that even in cold, harsh moments, beauty and power could exist quietly, without noise. That was how I would respond, calm, poised, deliberate. I would let the impact of my actions speak louder than any raised voice or argument ever could. I thought about the meal I had prepared, the hours of effort I had poured into this house, the love that filled every corner. It was more than just food and decorations. It was a statement of care and devotion. And now it would serve as my stage, not to punish, not to humiliate, but to command the respect I deserved. I envisioned the moment, the realization on their faces when they recognized that my silence was not weakness, that my presence and my preparation carried weight beyond mere courtesy. My mind raced through options, weighing each one carefully. I could walk away, let them have the moment, feel the sting and let it fade quietly. But no, that would be giving in to their indifference. I could confront them immediately with words, let frustration spill over, but that risked reducing the moment to petty quarrel. No, I needed patience, precision, and timing. I needed to let the situation unfold, then respond in a way that was undeniable, unignorable, and controlled. As I considered my choices, I began to feel a thrill beneath the hurt, a spark that reminded me of my own strength. I realized that the true power lay not in retaliation, but in assertive dignity. I would let them see, truly see, the consequences of their indifference, not through anger, but through confidence and presence. I pictured them noticing, finally, that I would no longer sit quietly while being overlooked, that my worth could not be ignored, that respect is not given, it is claimed. I returned to the table, running my fingers lightly over the carefully arranged silverware. Each fork, each plate, each carefully folded napkin reminded me of the patience and attention I had invested in this day, and I would use that very day, that very table, that very meal as the canvas for my assertion. I began mentally rehearsing what I would say, how I would stand, where I would position myself, how my demeanor could convey more power than any angry words ever could. There was a subtle excitement in the air now, mingled with the lingering hurt. This was the turning point, the moment where disappointment transformed into determination, where loneliness became fuel for action. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. They thought they could ignore me, leave me behind, take my love for granted, but they were about to realize that their actions had consequences, not in anger, not in humiliation, but in the quiet, unshakable way of a mother who knows her worth. I considered timing, pacing, and effect. I decided to let them continue their small, polite chatter for a few more moments, to let them feel secure in their indifference before I would step forward. The anticipation built in my chest, a steady rhythm of excitement and control. They think this is just another Christmas, another meal, another routine. Little did they know the narrative had shifted. I was no longer a silent participant in their disregard. I was about to reclaim my space, my respect, and my voice. As I took my seat once more, I visualized the reactions I would witness, their confusion, their realization, the silent acknowledgement that this mother, this woman who had given so much, who had prepared so carefully, who had hoped and waited and been ignored, was not to be discounted. The anticipation made my heart beat faster, but not with panic. This was confidence, measured and deliberate. I was ready. I closed my eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, centering myself. I repeated a quiet mantra: I am seen, I am heard, I am respected. With that, I felt the shift complete. The hurt had not disappeared, but it had transformed into power. The loneliness remained as a reminder of their betrayal, but it also became my fuel. Every thought, every movement, every word I would soon speak would assert my worth. And so I waited, poised, ready, and in control. The meal, the table, the room. It was all prepared for the moment when my dignity would no longer be ignored. I had decided to respond, not in haste, not in anger, but with intention, with precision, and with undeniable presence. The anticipation of that moment, the moment they would realize that their indifference could no longer hold power over me, was electric. Christmas had become my stage, and I, finally, was ready to step into the spotlight, not for revenge, but for respect. And in that quiet, simmering tension, I knew one thing. By the end of this night, they would understand. I took a slow, steadying breath, feeling the warmth of the candles and the faint aroma of the meal I had so carefully prepared surround me. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with purpose. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when my silence, my patience, my deliberate composure would finally meet the truth of their actions. I rose from my chair, smoothing my dress and walking toward the living room, each step measured, deliberate. I knew that every movement, every pause would carry weight. As I approached them, my son and daughter-in-law looked up, and I saw it immediately. Confusion flickered in their eyes. Their casual, indifferent demeanor, the politeness they had worn like armor all evening, began to crack under the pressure of my presence. I could feel their gaze flicking toward the table, the decorations, and then back at me, trying to reconcile the woman standing before them with the mother they had ignored. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I didn't let the hurt spill out in anger. Instead, I spoke with a calm clarity that seemed to draw the room into a still, heavy silence. "I've spent hours preparing this evening," I said, my voice steady, warm, yet firm. I imagined us celebrating together, sharing a meal, and enjoying each other's company. But instead, I've been left here, alone at my own table, while you chose to ignore me. Their reactions were immediate, subtle, yet unmistakable. My son's brow furrowed, his jaw tightening, as if he had just realized the gravity of his actions. I could see the shift in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, of recognition that he had overstepped boundaries and hurt the one person who had given so much. My daughter-in-law's hand paused mid-motion, the polite smile she had worn all evening faltering, replaced by a quiet shame, her eyes lowered in avoidance. I held their gaze, unwavering, not with anger, but with undeniable dignity. "I am your mother," I continued, each word deliberate. "I have given my love, my effort, and my time for this family, and tonight my love was ignored. My presence was dismissed. I will not allow that to happen again." I could see the weight of my words settle over them, like a blanket that cannot be shrugged off. There was no interruption, no attempt to argue or explain. Their silence spoke louder than any defense they might have offered. And in that silence, I realized how powerful my calm, measured approach had become. It was not fury that commanded respect. It was certainty. It was presence. It was the unwavering knowledge of my own worth. I stepped closer to the table, my hands lightly touching the edge, as if to reclaim not just the meal, but the attention and recognition I deserved. "This table," I said softly, "this meal, this home, they are my labor of love, and they are not to be disregarded. Respect is not given freely. It is earned and acknowledged." My son swallowed, a subtle catch in his throat, revealing a mixture of surprise and guilt. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, searching for words that wouldn't come. My daughter-in-law shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the beautifully set centerpiece, the golden turkey, and the carefully arranged decorations, realizing for the first time that everything they had ignored was a reflection of my care and devotion. I didn't raise my voice, but the weight behind my words grew with each pause, each glance, each deliberate step. "I have loved this family with everything I have," I said, "and tonight I am showing you that my love is not weakness, nor is it a reason to disregard me. I will not be invisible. I will not be overlooked, and I will not allow indifference to define our relationship." The tension in the room was palpable. I could see the shift in their demeanor, the way the casual confidence they had worn like armor earlier began to falter. They were no longer in control. The narrative had shifted. I had reclaimed the center of this moment, commanding their attention not through anger, but through calm authority, through dignity, through the undeniable truth of my presence. As I stepped back slightly, letting the weight of my words settle, I watched as my son avoided my gaze, guilt heavy in his posture. My daughter-in-law's hands rested tensely on her lap, eyes cast downward, a mixture of shame and realization written clearly across her features. I did not gloat. I did not chastise further. The moment had spoken for itself. The respect I demanded, the acknowledgement I deserved, was now undeniable. I allowed a quiet pause, letting the room absorb the energy shift. The air was thick with unspoken understanding, with the recognition that the woman before them, the mother they had tried to sideline, was no longer willing to be ignored. I had taken control, not with fury, but with presence. I had confronted not just their actions, but their disregard, and I had done so with dignity, grace, and unwavering calm. Then I finally sat back at my chair, letting the quiet triumph of the moment sink in. I had made my point. I had asserted my worth, and though the air was still heavy with emotion, I knew that something fundamental had changed. For the first time that evening, they were not in control. I was. And in that control, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice, of acknowledgement, of personal power that no betrayal could take away. This confrontation, this deliberate, calm assertion of self, was not the end of the night, but it was the turning point, the moment when the balance shifted, when the lesson was made clear, when I reclaimed my voice and my respect, without raising it in anger, without humiliation, simply through the undeniable presence of a mother who refused to be ignored. And as I looked around the room, at the table, the decorations, and the faces of my son and daughter-in-law, I realized that this Christmas, though it had begun with betrayal, would end with something far more valuable: recognition, respect, and the quiet triumph of dignity reclaimed. As the evening settled and the room grew quiet, I sat back at my chair, letting the last of the tension from the confrontation fade into a reflective calm. The candles flickered gently, their warm glow casting soft shadows across the table, and the carefully arranged decorations I had prepared with so much care. I could feel my heart slowly steadying, my breathing evening out, and a quiet pride beginning to bloom. This night, though it had started with betrayal and hurt, had become a turning point, not just for my family, but for me. I realized, as I looked around the room, that respect is not something freely given, even by those we love. It must be recognized, acknowledged, and sometimes demanded. I thought of all the times I had put others first, swallowed my hurt, ignored my own feelings to keep the peace. And yet, in doing so, I had allowed my presence to be overlooked, my care to be taken for granted. This Christmas, I learned that loving someone does not mean sacrificing your own dignity. I reflected on the importance of family boundaries, how crucial it is to recognize that even the people we hold closest to our hearts are not entitled to overstep them. There is a line between love and disregard, between care and indifference, and this night had made that line painfully but clearly visible. I had been standing on one side of it for years, giving endlessly, and it took their betrayal for me to step firmly onto the other side, to reclaim my space, my voice, and my worth. Standing up to loved ones is never easy. It is emotionally complex, fraught with guilt, worry, and doubt. But I learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act, to assert yourself, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it feels risky. I saw clearly that avoiding confrontation had only allowed disrespect to persist. By choosing to speak calmly, firmly, and with dignity, I did not harm my family. I asserted a truth they had ignored. I showed them that boundaries exist and that love cannot thrive in the absence of respect. I thought of my son and daughter-in-law, sitting quietly, perhaps reflecting on their own behavior. Their faces, once indifferent, now carried hints of guilt, shame, and awareness. And while I did not act out of anger or revenge, I realized that my presence alone had communicated volumes. The lessons were not just mine, they were theirs as well. And in that moment, I felt a subtle, profound shift in the energy of our family. Respect, once ignored, had been firmly reclaimed. Empowerment, I realized, comes not from retaliation, but from clarity and composure. I had been hurt, yes, deeply, but in that hurt, I discovered my own strength, the power to assert my needs, and the knowledge that self-respect is never negotiable. I reflected on all the past moments when I had stayed silent for the sake of others, when I had ignored my own emotions to avoid conflict. I understood now that silence had only allowed disregard to continue. By choosing to act, I transformed pain into growth. I thought of the broader lesson. Life will present situations where we feel undervalued, overlooked, or betrayed, sometimes even by those we love most. It is in these moments that we must remember our worth, speak our truth, and enforce our boundaries. Love and respect are not mutually exclusive, but love cannot exist fully without acknowledgement and care. This realization filled me with a quiet, unwavering sense of empowerment. I also reflected on the emotional growth I had experienced that evening. The hurt was real, the disappointment deep, but I had learned to channel it into strength rather than despair. I had faced a difficult situation with composure, dignity, and intentionality, and in doing so, I had grown, not just as a mother, but as a person who understands the value of self-respect and emotional courage. As the evening drew to a close, I looked around at the table one last time. The candles, the centerpiece, the meal I had prepared so lovingly. Everything remained as perfect as I had envisioned, but it was no longer just about the food or the decorations. It was about what they represented, my dedication, my care, my voice, and my worth. And for the first time that night, I felt fully seen, not just by my family, but by myself. I realized that standing up for oneself is not an act of defiance. It is an act of love. Love for oneself and indirectly for others as well. By asserting my boundaries, I not only reclaimed my dignity, but also modeled the importance of respect, honesty, and emotional integrity for those around me. I understood that respect is earned, recognition is deliberate, and love is most powerful when coupled with taige, the courage to uphold one's self-worth. As I finally rose from my chair, I felt lighter, stronger, and more confident than I had in years. The betrayal, the hurt, the shock, they had all transformed into lessons, insight, and quiet triumph. I knew that I had faced a difficult test of patience, courage, and emotional resilience, and I had emerged empowered, unwavering, and dignified. And in that moment, I promised myself something vital. No matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter how difficult the family dynamics or how painful the betrayals, I would never again allow my voice to be ignored or my presence dismissed. I would stand firm in my self-respect, embrace my worth, and navigate life's trials with courage and dignity. Christmas had begun with hurt, abandonment, and disappointment, but it ended with empowerment, growth, and a renewed sense of self. I learned that even in the face of betrayal, it is possible to reclaim dignity, assert boundaries, and stand firmly in one's own worth. That night, I discovered not only the power of self-respect, but the strength that comes from embracing it fully. I stood slowly from the table, feeling the weight of the evening lift slightly from my shoulders. The candles flickered one last time, casting gentle shadows across the room, and I took a deep breath. Every step I took felt deliberate, steady, a quiet declaration that I would no longer allow myself to be disregarded. My son and daughter-in-law watched, still processing, still realizing the significance of the moment. I straightened my back, held my head high, and let my eyes scan the room one final time. This was more than a Christmas dinner. It was a declaration of self-respect, a statement that my presence and my care cannot be ignored. I felt a deep sense of calm satisfaction, knowing that I had stood firm, asserted my boundaries, and reclaimed the dignity that was rightfully mine. And then I said it, softly but with conviction, a line that had been forming in my mind all evening. They wanted me quiet, but at dessert I served more than sweetness. I served respect. The words hung in the air, deliberate, powerful. They were more than a statement. They were a message to my family and a reminder to myself. Respect is not given automatically, and it cannot be assumed. It must be claimed, honored, and defended, even when it feels uncomfortable to do so. I looked directly into the camera, knowing that many watching might have faced similar moments. When loved ones dismiss you, overlook you, or fail to recognize your worth, and I wanted them to hear this. Asserting your boundaries is not selfish. Claiming your respect is not cruel. Standing tall in the face of indifference is an act of courage, dignity, and love for yourself and ultimately for the relationships that matter most. As I gathered my coat and stepped toward the door, I carried more than leftovers or a perfectly prepared meal. I carried empowerment, strength, and clarity. Tonight, I had learned something essential. Even when family disappoints, even when expectations are broken, your value remains, your voice matters, and your presence demands recognition. I opened the door, felt the cool air brush my face, and walked away with purpose. My steps echoed the lessons of the evening: confidence, self-respect, and unwavering dignity. And in that quiet, satisfying moment, I smiled, knowing that this night, this Christmas, would not be remembered for betrayal alone, but for the courage it took to stand up, speak out, and show that true respect is never silent.